Hello and a warm welcome to this week's edition of Africa 360. I'm Kwangu Liwewe. The recent escalation of attacks in Nigeria by Islamic extremist group Boko Haram has once again put the spotlight on Nigeria's security situation. With less than 3 weeks to go before the country goes to the polls, there are fears Boko Haram could derail the vote. Let's get some insight into who Boko Haram is.
Founded in 2002, Boko Haram is an Islamist militant group whose aim is to create an Islamic state in northeastern Nigeria. The group was founded by Muhammad Yusuf, and its trademark tactics were originally the use of attackers mounted on motorbikes who would detonate bombs targeting senior politicians, policemen, and anyone who criticized its ideology. But the group has since transformed into a fully fledged military organization, carrying out daring attacks on heavily armed military bases and police stations in Nigeria and Cameroon. Now, the version of Islam that it promotes makes it haram or forbidden for Muslims to take part in any political or social activity associated with Western society. But just 5 years ago, Boko Haram was almost wiped out. The group launched a spate of attacks targeting police stations and government buildings in Nigeria's northern city of Maiduguri. The ensuing shootout that erupted between security forces and Boko Haram left hundreds of Boko Haram supporters dead. Nigeria's forces seized Boko Haram's headquarters, captured its fighters, and killed the group's founding leader. However, its fighters regrouped under a new leader, Abubakar Shekau, stepping up the insurgency across northern Nigeria. In April last year, the group kidnapped more than 200 schoolgirls in the northeastern town of Chibok, also in Borno State. Although the abductions drew widespread international condemnation, the girls have still not been found. And Boko Haram opened the new year with a deadly series of attacks on the northeastern town of Baga. Though the Nigerian government disputes the figure, saying the casualties stand at 150, it is believed over 2,000 people were killed in the attacks, with many more displaced. The United Nations Security Council has strongly condemned Boko Haram's recent escalation of attacks and abductions. The Council also welcomed plans to deploy a multinational force to fight Boko Haram. But it is unclear how successful any multinational team will be in combating the scourge of terrorism in West Africa. And with that, it's back to Kwangu in the studio.
That was Adore Achumba, ENCA's West Africa correspondent. Now, joining me from Lagos, Nigeria, is Santos Aro, who is a Nigerian political analyst. Thank you very much, Mr. Aro, for joining us here on Africa 360. Let's go straight into it now. Nigeria is heading for an election in 3 weeks' time from now. But Boko Haram continues to be one of the biggest challenges facing the country at the moment. Would you comment on this, please?
Yes, it's a bit of challenge on the part of the Nigerian government. But, you know, wars are usually messy. Wars are naturally unpredictable and protracted. The Nigerian government is trying as hard as it can to help rein in the terror of Boko Haram. But then if you look at it from what is going on currently, the Nigerian armed forces, being a conventional army, is ill-equipped to fight this counter-insurgency.
Now,
That's where the problem is in Nigeria.
Mr. Aro, you've just talked about them being ill-equipped. What about resources? Because it appears as if Boko Haram has more resources than the Nigerian army. And considering, of course, Nigeria is the biggest economy on the continent, yet this group seems to be doing better off than the Nigerian army itself.
Yeah, the Nigerian army is a very brave and competent conventional army. But Boko Haram is an asymmetric warfare that they're engaged in. So currently, What I think the Nigerian army lacks is that they lack the 3 T's that will help them win the war, which is training, tactics, and technology. And beyond that, even in terms of the numbers game, when you look at the strength of the Nigerian army, they do not have enough latitude, enough men and women that can surmount this.
Mr. Aro, why does the government downplay atrocities committed by Boko Haram? And an example of these are the recent attacks in Baga and also the case of Bring Back Our Girls. Government at that stage was saying a day after the girls were taken that they had got the girls back. Is this a deliberate policy of misinformation by government?
In my opinion, the reportage of the Boko Haram massacre is being done by the independent press. The world press is in Nigeria, CNN is in Nigeria, BBC is in Nigeria, Voice of America is in Nigeria, and Nigeria has a very robust press. So it's what gets reported that we get to hear in Nigeria. I am not aware if there is any design by the government to downplay the atrocities, because these are things that are open to all of us to see. And even beyond that, the international and independent press have their contacts in all these ravaged territories in Nigeria that give them direct feedback on what has happened in the country.
Elections are on the 14th of February, and if these attacks continue, this will surely disenfranchise about 5.6 million voters from the north of the country. How do you see this panning out?
Honestly, as we speak, I know the National Electoral Commission, the INEC, says the election should go on. Both the ruling party and the opposition party say the election should go on. But my take on it is, as the time for the election approaches, it behoves INEC as the electoral body and the security agencies to look at the reality on ground, to know whether the election is in the best interest of the country and of the citizens to hold an election in the area that is under siege. On a personal note, and honestly speaking, if I am sent to Baga as an electoral official, I will not dare.
That was Santos Aro, a Nigerian political analyst, talking to us from Lagos, Nigeria. Do join us after the break, because when we return, I'll be joined by a panel of guests for more analysis on the Nigerian situation. Do stay with us.
Around Nigeria, in Chad, in Cameroon, and other surrounding countries, we are going to see spillover effects. And I don't think no one wants that. In an era when we're talking about Africa rising, I think we also need to see peace, security, and stability rising in consequence.
Welcome back. You're watching Africa 360. Today, we're looking at the Islamic extremist group Boko Haram and their recent escalation of attacks in Nigeria. Joining me now is Deprose Muchena from Amnesty International and Nigerian socio-political commentator Adethunji Omotola. Also with us is Sanni David, who is the convener of Congress for New Nigeria. Gentlemen, thanks very much for joining us on Africa 360. Adethunji, I'll start with you. This is a highly anticipated election, and we see Boko Haram is still on a rampage in northern Nigeria. How do they manage to carry on to such a scale with such frequency in their attacks in northern Nigeria?
Well, obviously, Kwangu, you've got to understand the modus operandi of Boko Haram. These guys work in cells. They're not sitting in one place. That's why they're able to carry out multiple attacks at different locations. They have highly sophisticated equipment, and they're very determined in carrying out those attacks. And what we've seen is that the Nigerian military also has been constrained in terms of personnel, in terms of their ability to be able to stretch as far and wide as Boko Haram has been able to do. In terms of the forces on the ground, the JTF, which is the joint task force between the army and the police, they are in about 10 states. Well, you will see that most of the attacks that Boko Haram carries out are in border towns, like what happened recently in the strategic town of Baga, and also in Chibok, where they kidnapped those girls. So these guys are very sinister, clever. They go to border towns, they attack in the middle of the night, and also they lay ambush on the military as well, and even attack military posts as well. So it's very difficult for the Nigerian army to be able to anticipate where next they're going to attack.
Deprose, maybe you can come in here. He's just explained how the Nigerian army is failing to curb the insurgency of Boko Haram. Now, the government obviously looked at curbing this thing militarily. Are there any other ways that they can resolve this Boko Haram issue?
I think there are several ways, and it's an important point of departure. Trying to solve things militarily in this kind of war is an asymmetrical warfare. There's huge inequalities between Boko Haram fighters and the Nigerian military. And I think you can have a military onslaught and you end up going into all kinds of complications, including what we are seeing now, crimes against humanity, war crimes being committed, especially by Boko Haram, but also those suspected of being Boko Haram members being arrested and being taken through torture, and then also the government starting to become liable for crimes against humanity as well. So I think there ought to be other forms of solution to support a military one, which is a political solution, a much more regionally based and supported solution. The African Union, ECOWAS, the UN, and other bodies need to step in to support the Nigerian state so that we can have a much more durable resolution to this crisis. The second point I want to make is that I think from what Omotola just mentioned here, border town sort of focus reflects the kind of society that Nigeria as a country has become, highly unequal, between north and south. If you look at the levels of poverty in the north, they are higher than levels of poverty in the south, and that tends to feed into extreme ideas because extreme ideas are fed on lack of education, ignorance, poverty, starvation, unemployment. And I think economic solutions, wider equitable distribution of the Nigerian cake is also critical to curb these extreme ideas.
On the economic point that you just raised, but who would want to invest in such an area which is so volatile, and the same group is actually against developments such as banks and schools, etc. So who exactly would dare go into an area to invest there?
That, in fact, is the problem. What starts first, the potential that Nigeria can offer to the African continent is what I'm looking at. This is now, if you look at the latest figures, the largest economy on the continent. It's a $520 billion economy as a country. In 2020, Nigeria would enter the G20 as the 20th largest economy. And therefore, the leverage that will come with peace, the dividends of peace being distributed widely, will mean so much for Nigeria's human development. And therefore, all efforts need to be directed at stopping this war and stopping these activities.
Now, recently, the group launched one of its deadliest attacks in Baga. Amnesty International's figures are 2,000, the Nigerian government disputing these figures. It always seems that the Nigerian government has something to hide when it comes to figures, and they're very elusive when it comes to information. Maybe you'd care to comment on this, Sanni.
Yes, if you look at the issue of the Chibok girls, at the time they said it was political and that there were no girls who were missing. And it came to a point that the president himself had to acknowledge. And as at that point in time, it became a national shame to the extent that they have now sidelined the First Lady. If you notice very well, you will discover that the First Lady has not been making any national commentary of late. So that is to the extent that there are so many people who are in government, but there is nobody who is accountable. And I keep saying that the major problem of Boko Haram escalation is that the people have been neglected for too long. What am I saying in essence is that you have a government that has not equipped its military for the past 16 years. But here you are having governors who are looting the country's money, taking them abroad to invest in properties, and nobody is being held accountable. We have a situation where a senator from the Niger Delta was granted a presidential pardon, and it's the same government of President Jonathan. When you had the Speaker of the National Assembly, Aminu Tambawa, saying that the body language of Mr. President supports corruption, he comes and tells you that stealing is different from corruption. So I think that the major problem of Nigeria is them not being accountable. They have lost focus because he who must come to equity must come with clean hands.
Omotola, your thoughts on Sanni's sentiments about corruption being a vice in Nigeria?
Look, I've always said that a government that does not care about its citizens will lose the legitimacy. I think my own worry about the current government is that in terms of how they manage the security situation, what they do even after the attacks, it is very painful when you see so many people that have been abducted, so many people that have been killed, and the president does not say anything. And then he gives condolences to François Hollande in Paris for 12 or 15 people that were killed. And also when you look at even the areas, until the criticism was so deep, President Jonathan did not take a trip. Then he later took a trip to Maiduguri, and we saw footage of him going to see the sick and the wounded in the hospitals. A president, commander-in-chief of armed forces of Africa's largest economy, Africa's most populous country, must care. You remember last year, April 14, there was a bombing in Nyanya. About 80 people died. The next day, the president went to Kano for a unity rally for PDP. Those things send the wrong message.
Does it show that he basically doesn't care about what's happening in the north of the country?
Look, I think he's become numb to the killing, because if you look at the series of attacks since 2009, there have been more than 1,000 attacks, and almost 20,000 people are dead. And also, the fact is, he knows in his heart that there are people, he's even said it, that there's Boko Haram in his own government. So he feels that he's helpless to be able to change the situation, so he just carries on anyway. But still, he must respond, because he's an elected president.
Deprose, just come in quickly before we go to a break. He just described the president as being numb to these deaths. I mean, we know Boko Haram has almost daily attacks in the north of the country. How do you respond to this when a government can be numb to such atrocities?
Yeah, the activities and the scale of destruction of Boko Haram sends a chilling effect to members of the government, security sector, and others, that sometimes inaction becomes an option. I think the call is that the Nigerian government and state must rise to the responsibility of protecting its people, especially civilians. The African Union must also not be numb. The Constitutive Act of the African Union, Article 4, talks about the responsibility to protect. When a state is unwilling or unable to protect its own citizens from rights violations, the African Union must step in. So I'm hoping the meeting in Addis Ababa will address Nigeria as a critical agenda item, because the destruction that's taking place in the north is going to ripple down onto the continent in a way that creates country risk factors all over the board. Around Nigeria, in Chad, in Cameroon, and other surrounding countries, we're going to see spillover effects. And I don't think no one wants that. In an era when we're talking about Africa rising, I think we also need to see peace, security, and stability rising in consequence.
Gentlemen, let's hold on to that thought, because when we return from this short break, we'll continue our discussion about the threat of Boko Haram and how the notorious groups continues to haunt many Nigerians, especially in the north of the country. Do stay with us.
We may say that we have grown in terms of being the largest economy, but in terms of the GDP per capita, structurally, nothing has happened. So it does not affect the common man in the street. So to me, the common man has not benefited in any way. And that brings it to naught as far as I am concerned.
Welcome back. I'm still joined by my guests. Thank you once again for joining us, gentlemen. Now, we're looking at the upcoming election in less than 3 weeks' time. Now, when it comes to Boko Haram, regardless of who wins the election, do you think there'll be any changes in terms of their onslaught in the north of the country, Omotola?
From 2011 May, when Jonathan was sworn in, there was a correlation between his swearing in and the spike in Boko Haram activity that even led to, on January 20 in Kano, where about 185 soldiers or policemen were killed. And if you look at it as we're getting closer to the elections, they've stepped up the ante. There's evidence that is clear that the Northerners do not want Jonathan to go back into power. We've never had in the history of Nigeria a president from the Niger Delta, a minority. The Ijaws are only 10% of the population. The Hausa Fulani about 29% of the population. The Yorubas are 21%. The Igbos are 18%. People who feel that Jonathan is weak, they feel that he doesn't deserve to be president of Nigeria. Some people believe that he's stolen their mandate from the north, because where we're supposed to be looking at, in the PDP at least, was a balancing act. And even the late Azazi Owoye, the former national security advisor, alluded to the fact that there's a political link between Boko Haram and this old insurgent and the political class. And we've seen that even in Borno State, with the former governor who was sponsoring Boko Haram allegations, a senator who was actually arrested but wasn't prosecuted. And if you look at how the former leader, Mohammed Yusuf, was killed extrajudicially because he had links. Even the commissioner for religious matters, a guy called Buba Foy or something, he was killed in police custody. So there's clear evidence. And that's why I said earlier that if Buhari wins, it's not that he's a Boko Haram apologist, but the North will now feel that power has moved to the North. And I can tell you that more of them will now weigh in on how to deal with this problem, because it is an embarrassment for them, but they're not saying as much as they should say, because they feel that, you know, these guys, even though they're not the ones sending them on a mission, they have something to benefit from this.
Although good luck Jonathan's tenure was overshadowed by security woes. There are some good things his administration is credited with. Let's take a look.
57 years old, Jonathan has been in office since May 2011. His government's transformation agenda has yielded impressive results. Under his watch, Nigeria's economy became Africa's largest, surpassing that of South Africa. His agriculture strategy saw over 4 million farmers being subsidized with farming inputs. Improvements in the education system and his willingness to address infrastructure problems are seen as key successes for Jonathan's government. Despite current security challenges, President Goodluck Jonathan has affirmed Nigeria's position as the continent's preferred destination for foreign direct investment.
Sanni, from what we've just seen in the insert, apart from the criticisms of security woes, there have been some pluses since Goodluck Jonathan took over the realm of the presidency in Nigeria. For instance, Nigeria overtook South Africa as as the largest economy on the continent.
What we're having today is the private sector-driven initiative. It is not about the government policies.
So the government has done nothing at all since he took the helm?
When we look at what we are looking in this scenario, they're talking about Nigeria being the largest economy.
Not only that, but my question is, since he took over, has he done anything good?
Well, I cannot see what he has done, because what is paramount to the people is that Nigerians want to see an improved power situation, which has not happened. He promised, when he took over power, that he was going to handle it within the next 4 years. And this is 2015. He's seeking a re-election, and he has not delivered on his electoral promises. So what is that one thing that he has done for the people? He should come out and tell us. So Nigerians' security has worsened. The economic situation has worsened. We may say that we have grown in terms of being the largest economy, but in terms of the GDP per capita, structurally, nothing has happened, so it does not affect the common man in the street. So to me, the common man has not benefited in any way, and that brings it to naught as far as I am concerned.
Adethunji, your thoughts on Goodluck Jonathan's performance since he came into office?
Look, I think that if I have to score Jonathan in terms of his success as a president, of course, he's challenged heavily. I mean, if somebody's putting a bomb under your table and a bomb under your armpit, it's very difficult for you to focus on the job at hand. But what he has been able to do on the agriculture side, he's done massively well. You'll recall that the Minister for Agriculture, Dr. Adeshina, was Forbes Person of the Year in 2013, I believe. They've done a lot in terms of reducing the importation of rice, which Nigerians enjoy so much. So now we're growing our own rice. Also in terms of the airports. Before, if you go through the airport, Murtala Mohammed, it was a nightmare, long queues and so on. They've been able to move the arrival, they've expanded, they've done a lot, about 22 airports. Also in terms of reducing the amount of ghost workers that we have, because there was a lot of ghost workers. They've also automated the paying system. They've also improved on the collection of taxation. They've
I will beg to disagree on that point.
Okay, let me just have this.
Yes, I just want to comment before you continue, because these things that you are enumerating are being done by the government of the APC, which is the All Progressive Congress.
I know in national level.
Yes, in terms of national level, the tax system you are talking about, it's been spearheaded by the APC governors in Lagos State and in Edo State. I have been at home. You need to go home and see.
Can I just say this point? The president has done quite a lot on the economic side and welfare side. But sadly, because of Boko Haram, people don't even notice. And he talks about APC. The APC has only of late been able to get as many states. And even in some APC states, they haven't done so well. In some PDP states, they haven't done so well. But at the top level, the president, if I have to give him marks in terms of the economy, I'll give him 9 out of 10. But in terms of security, I'll say he's only done maybe about 4 out of 10. Because, the military is comatose at the moment.
Deprose, what would you say on that, especially rating the president in dealing with Boko Haram and in dealing with human rights issues? Because, of course, there have been some accusations that the army has dealt with this heavy-handedly.
Yes. My issue is the distribution of the benefits of growth into the wider population. I think it's critical to look at. The distribution and the dividends of that whole growth must be managed in such a way that it enhances the ability of the population to come together and rise above the divisions that you are currently seeing. So that's on the economic side. On the human security side, I think there's been some failures that the Nigerian government and state would need to look at. And we've seen deterioration. And we've also been raising in our reports, various reports of crimes against humanity being committed. I think that a Nigerian state, which is a leader of the continent, needs to project itself in such a way other states can follow. I think on that score, even within Nigeria, there's a conversation taking place and agreement that they could have done better.
Are you optimistic that we'll see some good changes in Nigeria?
I am optimistic that changes will come if we change Jonathan.
Well, that brings us to the end of this week's episode of Africa 360. Please share your views on our show today, and you can join the debate by going to our Facebook page or tweet us your views at Africa360_ENCA. You can also send us an email to africa360@enca.com. So until next time, it's goodbye for now. Thanks for watching.
Oh, tell me why this is happening. Can we just stop and start living happily? Religious crises, them are fighting, and the innocent people, them be dying. Why should the masses be suffering?